Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the Jukem Cinematic Universe. I apologize being over hyper. But today's video is talking about projectile deletion and specifically two supports that help out with that. As you could probably surmise, projectile deletion is, well, when you delete a projectile. This can be found in various things, the most common one being of which is when two projectiles try to clash with each other. In this game, there are several tiers of projectiles, with stronger projectiles beating out weaker projectiles, and those of the same tier clashing with each other. For example, as we can see right here, Blastoise is using Water Gun, which is going to beat out my Sideway right here. Decent projectile priority, but not as much as this giant water ball that is firing at me. Now, this isn't just for projectiles. This can be found in other things, such as Lapras here. Deletes a lot of projectiles because it's like kind of a physical hit. It's not a projectile itself, but also many moves in this game that aren't just supports or other projectiles can do so, such as a big example being Defog right here. You can also find this with Machamp's Karate Chop and Braixen's Light Screen. And there's a few other like weirder ones too that you can find on like just normal hits, not even like special hits. The only things that won't be deleted through this are beams / pseudo beams. What do I mean by a pseudo beam? Well, it's the highest tier of a projectile that can't be deleted, but it's still somewhat different than something like Chandeler's beam, which is like a consistent thing. It's kind of weird, but it'll make a lot more sense when we get to something later. Generally, this means you have to use up a support, projectile, or physical hit, meaning you're left kind of wide open. But when we get to the other supports I want to talk about, they allow one to walk around and do other attacks while protected from projectiles. These supports being Whimsicott, which I'm covering. Look at that cute darling over there. And then also a world champion, Pachirisu. We're going to start off talking about Whimsicott. What can be said about Whimsicott? Well, Whimsicott is a 30-second charge support for both times you use it that brings substitutes around you. This will stop any projectile that comes in contact with the substitute, so that means they still have to travel to you, and it lasts for 5 seconds. A great thing about this support is that it does go through phases, but it will go away through any sort of grab animations, or in Darkray's case, Bad Dreams Rising. As you can see right there, that means a lot of time you don't really want to go for a grab punish as you're approaching a zoner, but at the same time, a lot of these like types of punishes usually would do more damage anyway if you were to do like a different combo starter. That would easily do 200, and you still get to keep it for a bit, or well, it went away, bad timing. And of course, it's great in Field Phase, which is just filled with projectiles. Same with Pachirisu, but because of how long it lasts, I'm just walking around right now. You can see how long, like Machamp can walk through this entire Field Phase, and like Frost Volcano especially is kind of long. I still have plenty of time. Obviously, you have to be worried about physical hits, but as you could probably seen at the beginning of this move, it has some counter armor onto it, which can allow for brief parries like this, especially when you're knocked down. A lot of time you might have to grab punish. Some characters' fastest options are grabs, but it's still a great momentum shift because it acts kind of like a DP, except for, you know, everyone, which is kind of weird when you think about this being a projectile deletion thing. It doesn't last for too long. As you can see right there, it's still really cool to have as an alternative option, and your opponent always has to think about it because they can't just do not a mindless Oki option, but an Oki option that is very reliable because it could be beat out by Whimsicott, and then you're able to do some sort of punish. That's not the end of it though, because another great thing that Whimsicott possesses is the fact that when you use it, it will heal 60%. Oh my god, that'd be busted. 60 gray health that you have. If it did 60%, it would be absolutely busted. This can make it super useful if your opponent is trying to like run away last second. There's a timeout situation and you're about to lose because of HP and you don't have burst to heal. So you just end up using Whimsicott and you end up healing it off. It could be very surprising, but a wise opponent will try to keep that in mind, most likely. Like, it's just another benefit that it just has randomly. I'm not too sure why, but it's very cool. I guess it represents like the substitute from the main games giving you health, whatever. Shut up, Krogunk, you don't deserve anything. But along with everything else it has, it just makes it fantastic for multiple different purposes, not just deleting projectiles. Now, there are a few downsides. 30 seconds isn't the worst, but it's also not very consistently like 20 like a lot of other supports can be. It also doesn't delete piercing projectiles or beams. So that makes it kind of a little bit useless against Chandelier in particular, but there are other piercing projectiles such as Gardevoir's Forward Y or Shadow Meteor's level 3 Psywave Blast. They're just considered too strong because what is really going on with this substitute shenanigans is that it's just putting a projectile in front and around you. So it has a set priority, but because of that, that also means projectiles that have a higher priority will just go straight through it. If I were to give recommendations, I would say it's very useful against Darkrai, probably the most useful use for it because it just goes through a lot of his rifts, like later hits, not the first physical hit, but that can also be really good for Oki opportunities where you armor through the first hit. I think I showed earlier. Also just good for Dark Pulses and other Field Phase projectiles against him when he wants to try to use those projectiles to try to get into Bad Dreams Rising. Could also be good for some projectiles from Gardevoir and Sceptile's traps. And of course, every other character has a projectile, but you know, that's just kind of the thing for this video, so you know. And now we have Pachirisu. Pachirisu is similar to Whimsicott, obviously deleting projectiles, except for the fact that it will delete projectiles as soon as they come out, no matter where they are on the screen. This can make it super useful for when you don't want to have to worry about a projectile coming at your Whimsicott, and then the Whimsicott just conveniently runs out, so then the projectile hits you anyway, and you're not ready for it. No, this will just get rid of the projectile right away. The one weird thing, though, about it is that it doesn't do it on frame 1. I literally had a situation where I'm playing Empoleon against a Chandelure, and I try to Aqua Jet, and I get hit by Neutral Y. Like, kind of like that a bit. Not, yeah, Pachirisu was still up, yeah. Kind of like that, and it was very awkward, and I was, like, so surprised, because I did not know that beforehand. I guess be aware of that. You will probably have to time something else, if it is, like, a constant sort of thing, like Chandelure's Neutral Y, or just hit them long range, like, kind of like that. It doesn't last as long, being only 3 seconds, and it also doesn't stay around through a shift. Now, I know that sounds bad, but Pachi does have a few benefits that Whimsicott doesn't. Obviously, I went over the whole projectile deleting right away thing, but it also has a charge time of 20 seconds per use, so it's much faster, and you can use it even more times per round if you really need it. But another fantastic benefit to this is the fact that it will actually delete piercing projectiles. It's way different for Whimsicott because it's not like a projectile covering yourself. It's just a whole projectile deletion tool all around, so it ignores any like piercing properties. That said, it still will not beat any beams, as you can see right here. Facing it head first. Please help me, Pachi. I just want to win this matchup. However, it will beat out level 3 Psywave Blast. This is what I meant by a pseudo beam, because it's like ball shaped, I guess. So it's like an actual projectile that isn't like connected like a beam would kind of is with Chandelure. It's a beam technically because you can't delete it with like Defog or Whimsicott, but it has like a huge asterisk saying not actually a full-on beam. It's like a subcategory, I guess. It's very weird, but do keep that in mind, and that is a benefit it does have over Whimsicott if you really want it. Not too many moves like that though. I think it's mostly just Shadow Mewtwo and probably like 2 or 3 other characters at most, I would assume, but it does have that advantage. Due to these traits, it's mostly just good against people who have lots of piercing projectiles, such as Chandelure. That's the main one, really. I'm not too sure how many characters have like a ton of piercing projectiles, but for the Gardevoir matchup I mentioned before, Forward Y is a big move of hers that does pierce when fully charged. So if you are looking for a support that can match that, so you can get in a little easier, that could be a good alternative. I think Whimsicott and Pachirisu do pretty decently against Gardevoir, but I do think all around Whimsicott might be more consistent. But even though its projectile erasing matchup use is a little it does have another benefit that Whimsicott doesn't have, and that is that if timed correctly, can't just spam it, you can actually go through Burst Wave fast enough to where I beat Shadow Mewtwo out before you can even try Burst Attack. So it could be weird though if you're not in Burst yourself, because obviously when you're in Burst, light attacks don't work. So you could have a situation like that happen. I think that wouldn't even whiff, so sometimes it could be a little awkward, and like I said, you can't really mash it. I'm gonna mash it right now. And it still did it. So it's very brief frame 1 projectile priority, not actual full-on invulnerability. Though it did have that in a patch, which is funny because most of the time people will start using Pachirisu just for the full-on immunity on Wake Up. Kind of like what I tried talking about with Whimsicott for counter armor, but like actually full-on immunity, so then they can just whiff punish. But of course, never for the projectile priority, which was its like entire existence for being, you know, a support. Just a funny little fact from Pokken's past. Though it isn't just Burst Wave, because Burst Wave is just another type of projectile. So you can use this on any other like Oki option your opponent's doing if it's a projectile. It's kind of weird, not gonna lie. Now let me talk about the pros and cons of each of them, because they do have their own, you know, separate uses besides just deleting projectiles, and some of them do it better than others in different ways. Whimsicott obviously has other uses such as the healing and counter armor that gives it many more opportunities and make it more versatile. It also lasts between phases, lasts longer, and it will, you know, stop projectiles that spawn on top of the user because it's just a projectile surrounding them. So if you're using Whimsicott, you don't have to worry about that like if you're playing Pachirisu. I do, in my opinion, find it more effective against most of the cast and is more consistent. Mainly consistent because of all of the other things I mentioned, like the CA armor and the fact that it goes between phases and lasts longer. And I mentioned Darkrai already. You know, Darkrai's played by one of the top players in NA right now, so if you want to edge against him, sorry Shadowcat, Whimsicott may be a little helpful. Definitely a support that can totally shift, quite literally, from duel to field when you're in Bad Dreams Rising and make it much less of a pain and start pressuring the Bad Dreams Rising less. Darkrai. Is that how you say it? Bad Dreams Rising less. As for Pachi, while it doesn't have some of the other benefits Whimsicott does have, its projectile deletion thing is much greater, being able to delete those pseudo projectiles or piercing projectiles, and it charges much faster. As you can see, charge time fast as opposed to charge time average. We have Sigma male Pachirisu in the house. For particular matchups it's good at, I already mentioned Shandy. That's the main one really, just because Shandy has a million piercing projectiles. Shandy does have Flame Burst, and I think before it explodes it is technically deletable by Whimsicott, even though it does pierce. I think it's mostly just the fact that a lot of piercing projectiles are also kind of pseudo beams. I think that's how it is. For the most part, Pachirisu would help more in those cases than Whimsicott. So for a Chandler, probably would just go with Pachi. All of that said, my preference definitely does lie for Whimsicott. I prefer using Whimsicott against Darkrai when I fight Shadowcat in those scenarios, so that I can abuse the fact that I can take my turn back when I reasonably shouldn't be. He has to think more on Oki because of it, because I could just pop Whimsicott, armor through his stuff, and then grab him to shift the phase. Even with Pachi's use against Chandelure, I do prefer other stuff like Snivy Lapras. For me personally, this is all for preference, but I just don't find it too useful when it just lasts 3 seconds, even if it can be used multiple times per round, much more. Still a decent alternative all around for the cast if you do want to abuse the fact that you can go through burst waves. While that isn't a true punish like CA frames with Whimsicott, this definitely can surprise people and you can take your turn anyway. Just gotta make sure it's a strong attack unless you're also in burst mode. But yeah, both of these are super varied supports, and if you're interested in them because you kind of struggle against projectiles, that's basically all the ins and outs of details for both of them, which I find very fascinating because they made two supports that do the same thing but are, you know, very different, as I've mentioned. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time for more Pokken content in the Jukem Cinematic Universe. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more, and of course, praise to Cascoon. Now, do it.